So we're back with lesson 5. We've started kind of our overview of MongoDB. So we'll do a little bit deeper dive. So where did NoSQL come from? The whole thing really had to do with, as was mentioned earlier, had to do with scaling. So the problems were web applications would run into problems once they hit a certain size or once they had a certain number of concurrent users. Databases would tend to kind of collapse and bog down and slow down. So we're used to in a relational database, we're used to this, the table structure where we have relationships and we do this object relationship mapping and joining that really typically involves a fair bit of design, planning, and coding. The relational model, one of the other big limits with it is it's not very flexible. So when we design a database schema, we start putting data into it, we build an application on top of it. Things can get messy when we suddenly realize that the schema doesn't exactly fit our business requirements anymore. And this happens all the time where the data model we have needs to change as our application evolves. So SQL or relational databases are not very well designed for this. So in NoSQL, we're going to get used to some different terminology. So we don't speak of records in NoSQL databases. In fact, we store what's considered a record as a document, and typically a document is actually a JSON object. So they're designed for high performance and scalability because they don't have a schema. So each record in the same document can actually have a different format, and we can let that format evolve over time without having to redesign the database structure. Because in effect, the database has very little structure. A couple of the other neat points about document databases is we can nest documents inside other documents. So if we have parent and child relationship in a relational database, right? We have the parent over here in one table, we have the child records over here in another table, and then we have to have foreign keys and joins to connect them. Like let's say we've got artists and albums. We've got an artist collection, we have an albums collection, and then we've got a foreign key and joins if we want to query that information together. In a NoSQL database, we can just have an artist document and we could nest the albums inside, for example. And this scaling makes it well suited to cloud hosting because cloud hosting allows us to scale up or down our server resources based on user demand. So if many users are coming online simultaneously, we can just spin up another server automatically. When that demand drops, we can spin that server down. So here would be a sample of what a MongoDB document might look like. So this might be, for example, a restaurant document. So in MongoDB, every document automatically gets a unique identifier assigned, and that has the property name of _ID, and some long random string. Then we've got an address node, which itself is its own nested document. So address, rather than having a single value, it's a JSON object with a series of keys and values. Then we can also see this sort of one-to-many relationship here. So one restaurant might have multiple grades. So we would have a nested document inside with here's a first grade on one date and then a second grade on another date, for example. So it's all JSON, and different documents can have different schemas. We also don't use the term tables in a NoSQL DB. So in a relational database, we have tables and records. In a NoSQL database, we have collections instead of tables. We have documents instead of records. Okay, so we're going to use the term collection. It's not a tabular structure. It's just a grouping of related documents. And they might have the same schema, but they might have different schemas. In a relational database, we can't do this. All the records in a table have to follow the same schema. And the general structure of this document is JSON and typically keys and values. A street key with a value, zip code key with a value. So we don't typically use foreign keys, and there's no enforcing of relationship integrity. So in a relational database, for example, we couldn't have an album if we didn't have an artist as a parent and a foreign key. In a NoSQL database, we can. Now, there are some guidelines as to how to model them. I'll just pull this up quickly. So these slides are here. So these guidelines were updated last year. So this is a good article about relationships and some of the options here. So they address, so for example, they call modeling one to few. So something like an address. One person can have multiple addresses, but they're probably not going to have like a million addresses. So typically for one to few, they say you may want to embed. So I can just pick this up a bit. So we have a person document, and then inside we have a nested document of that person's addresses, because there won't be an unlimited number of addresses in reality. So this is one common structure. For one to many, for example, they've got a product in a parts ordering. In this case, we do it maybe a little bit more like in a relational database, where each product would have its own document and might reference different parts. But the actual part itself would be stored in a separate parts collection. So this would be kind of a one to many. Then they have one to squillions, which would be not just many, but a whole lot of many. So again, they recommend you put those child documents in their own collection. So there's not a right and a wrong way. So part of the question we have to ask ourselves is, how many? Is it one to few, one to many, or one to many, 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 which they call squillions? So this link, these slides are on Blackboard, and this link is here, so you can reference it as needed. So MongoDB comes from the word humongous. I think I mentioned in the video. It's been around for 14 years now, and the data is stored as JSON, but a special kind of JSON called Bison, which stands for binary JSON. So our JSON objects are converted to binary, to ones and zeros. It's super fast, and it integrates really well with Node because everything is JavaScript. It's supported, MongoDB is supported by lots of cloud hosts, and it has a really simple query syntax. So we don't write SQL commands. We write the kind of commands we would have used in ASP.NET controllers, where we would just, for example, call a find method and then pass in a JSON object as a parameter. That's instead of writing select star from post where title like Mongo, for example. So this is kind of shorthand. So we can get MongoDB for free at mongodb.com. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to walk you through what we're going to do, and then we'll do it together. We're going to go to MongoDB shortly. We're going to sign up for a free account. They let us create one database for free. And so we'll create what's called a cluster. So you can use this same cluster both for the Node Tunes library, and also you'll need it for assignment 2. So you won't be able to create two separate clusters on MongoDB. So you can just use the same database for both. We're going to pick the shared cluster. For teams learning MongoDB or developing small apps. So that's us. So they'll let us do this without having to pay. They have a free, we have to pick our region, and they have this free sandbox that gives us 0.5 gig of storage for free using a shared server. And then we'll have to create a username and password for our database. And then we can connect using this tool called MongoDB Compass. So this is like a graphical user interface. I've put the link up on Blackboard. We'll go and download that in just a minute. So you can get Compass. I think I've put the link here on Blackboard. Yes, so right here, but I'll put it in the chat as well. So Compass is MongoDB's desktop window. It's kind of like SQL Server Management Studio or MySQL Workbench, but it's small and very light, as you would expect for a kind of a product in the open source JavaScript world. So take a minute. It will run on any operating system, as I think Jillian mentioned. So go ahead and install Compass. Give me a thumbs up once you have it. And then we'll zip on over to the MongoDB site, and you can sign up and we can create a database. So we'll kind of walk through this process together.
Um, I worked with MongoDB once before, but it was a long time ago. I have MongoDB Compass community, but if I'm
Yep,
going to follow along with
that's
the
fine.
class, I may need some assistance or I may need to watch the video later.
Okay, yeah, if you already have Compass, that's fine. Whatever version you have will be just fine. You
Yeah,
don't
it's been
need to
months
do
since the
the.
last time I used
Yep,
MongoDB.
that's fine. No problem. You'll
Thank
be
you.
fine with what you've got. So just let me know, give me an indication when you're caught up and ready to move forward. I don't want to bore anybody, don't want to leave people behind. Thanks, Chris. Yes, Boogra. Thanks, Roden. Okay, Boogra, great. Yes, Chris. Does anybody still need time for setting up Compass? Or are we ready to move forward? Okay, we're gonna move on. If you do need me to stop, please let me know. I'm not getting any feedback, so I'm assuming people are with me. So in your browser, let's just go to mongodb.com. You should be able to try free. And you can just say, I'm learning MongoDB, put in your email and your password, and MongoDB will send you a verification link. It's very similar to the Heroku setup. Just go ahead and register, and then verify the email through the email that they send you.
I'm sorry, do we have to use the student email or it doesn't matter?
It doesn't really matter. Once you're all set up, your screen is going to look similar to mine. Actually looks fairly similar to the Heroku panel, really. Nice and clean. Again, please shoot me a thumbs up once you're here. So there's really the green button here where I'm in the Atlas tab. And under database deployment, it's prompting me to create a database. So I'm going to click on build a database. We are learning, so we want the free shared plan. It defaults to the dedicated plan. We don't want that. We'll click on create free. So it actually is using one of these services, AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure, but it defaults to AWS at the North Virginia data center, and it will let us create a free forever cluster. So you don't have to change any of the options here, just on free. It will recommend the free cluster. Not all of these are free. So if it's recommending, well, you're choosing the free shared database.
No, I'm sorry, I'm still in the welcome to Atlas page, and they ask me, what is your goal? I choose learn MongoDB, and they ask, what type of application are you building?
Can you share your screen, please, Mila, so I can see what you're looking at?
I cannot because I'm using second screen for WebEx. And it just asks application modernization, business intelligence, content management, gaming, something else.
Sorry, could you repeat those options, please?
Sorry, can I just rejoin to another WebEx session and I will share my screen, okay?
Yeah, that's fine. So for those of you who are here, you can just accept the default. You pick free and click on create cluster. Simon, you're getting the same. I'll just go out of here. Yeah, if one of you are able to share your screen so I can see what you're seeing, I can try to advise you.
So sorry, can I share my screen now?
Yes, please. Yep. Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay. Okay, so click the drop down under what type of application are you building? Scroll down. Just choose other. You may just have to type learning. Okay, click finish. Okay, so now you're caught up. Yep, so just click create cluster. Okay, I'm going to reshare here. So I'll click create cluster. So it's being created. It's going to take a few minutes for us to do, 1 to 3 minutes to provision. So this will tell us when it's done. One of the other things we can do while this is running, telling us it's deploying, is we're going to need to create a user. So over here on the left under security, we have a link for database access. We can click that. And we can add a new database user. So what we're going to do is you'll create a username for your database. So the easy thing, I'm just going to maybe use Comp2068. And for your password, one option is use your first name, use the city you were born in and the year. And I'll leave the privileges as read and write to any database. So you can create any password you like. You may want to put it down in a file. I'll just note mine in a file. And then we can just click the Add User button. So then you'll have a user account that has read and write access to any of your databases. Tells us our server creation was complete. It's still configuring. And then much like in the Azure portal, MongoDB by default, it blocks remote access. So we're going to now need to go to the network access tab and open up the firewall. So what we want to do is if you go to add IP address, you can just add 0.0.0/0. This will allow you remote access from anywhere. So I would recommend you add this to the list of allowable IPs. And you just click the confirm button. Otherwise, you can create the database, but you won't be able to connect to it. So I've already enabled this. I'm going to go back to my databases and see, okay, my cluster is now up and running. And now I can try to use Compass to connect. So if I click connect, it brings up this window, connect to my cluster. How do you want to connect? We can use the MongoDB shell. We can connect within our application. We'll do that later. Or we can connect with Compass. So I'm first going to choose connect with Compass. And it actually lets you download it right here. I'm going to choose I have MongoDB Compass. And then it gives us the connection string, which I can copy, but I'll have to replace the username and password. I will go through that process again. So we are in here, we are in our network access. We opened up the firewall. And then I went to databases. I clicked connect on my cluster. I chose connect using MongoDB Compass. And I chose I have MongoDB Compass. And then I just copied the connection string, and it says you will be prompted for the password for this username. So now I can go to Compass, which we've installed. Compass is very lightweight. There's not a lot of options. It's very simple. Paste your connection string. So I'll just paste it in. And then I'm going to replace the username and password. And also I have to get rid of those angled brackets. Those are just placeholders. So there's my new user. So I'm putting in my username and password. And notice it's connecting to a database called test. I'm going to change that. I'll make my database name. I'll just call it NodeDB. So the parameter at the end is the name of the database. So I'll put this in the chat as well. So there's the connection string. You'll just replace the username and password with your own username and password. I'll click connect. So I'm connected. So it gives me So what I want to do is actually I don't want this database, sorry. I want to create a database now, which I will call NodeDB. And when we create a new database, we must create at least one collection. So we'll call this artists. The first thing we'll put in our database are some artists. So again, we'll click Create Database here. I'll call it NodeDB. And I'm going to make a new empty collection called artists. And then we can just click Create Database. We've got a new database with one collection. And we could actually import data, or we could add data manually if we want. So for example, we could insert a document, and we could just use JSON if we wanted to put in some data. Maybe I'll insert something here. So inside my document, we'll have an ID. Actually, you know what? Sorry. We'll just leave it for now. We won't put any data in yet. So if we have CSV data or JSON data, we could import it here if we wanted to. So now our database is set up. We have a collection in here. Actually, I guess we could do it here. Sorry, I am going to try this. Let's put a couple of artists. Let's just populate our database with a few records. So if I click on my artist collection and click Add Data, I can insert a document. I'm then going to click on this button here, this little list. And if I click the number 1, I can add a field after the ID. So I'll call the field name. It defaults to a string, and I can put in any value here. So you can put in any artist that you want, and it inserts my document, which I could then edit, copy, delete. I'm going to add a few other artists. You can add any artist that you like. So insert a document. Oops. Again, I'll give it a name. Notice there's no schema here. We have to define the artist each time. So each has got an object ID, and each has got a name. I'll add one more. So again, my field will be name. So now I've got 3 documents in my collection. It tells me I've got 3 documents here. My table's tiny. It's only 136 bytes. So we can use Compass to populate some JSON documents into our database. So our database is set up. We've put a little bit of data into it. Our next step is to get our database to start talking to our node application. So let's have a look at how we're going to do this. Anybody have any questions so far before we move on to that? Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to jump back into our slides. We've taken care of our database setup. So we want to look at, we can kind of skip over, we can use command line. We're going to skip over that. But what we want to talk about is Mongoose. So Mongoose is an NPM package we're going to install and configure. So it's an object document mapper. So we'll create schemas or models. We're going to use the MVC pattern in our Node app. And then in our database, in our app.js, we're going to configure and connect to MongoDB. And then we can define a model class and insert data, insert documents into the database. So our connection will look something like this. So we want to connect to the database whenever our app starts. And we'll print out a message whether we're connected or not. So we're going to need our MongoDB connection string in our app.js file. Once we do that, we can build out a model or a schema. So we'll start with a really simple one. We'll make an artist model. We'll create a new schema. And then we can use the schema in our controller to start to perform add, edit, delete. Not the way that .NET does, Chris, no. But we'll store the credentials in another file. We could look at encrypting them later. We probably won't do that today. If we have time, we'll look at that. It's a good question. Okay, so we want to start to use Mongoose. So we'll go to our code editor. And in the root, we need to install Mongoose. So we're going to run npm I Mongoose. So Mongoose is that data access library that lets Node talk to MongoDB. There are some alternatives, but Mongoose is the most popular way to connect up Node and MongoDB. So use npm. We're going to use npm to install Mongoose. So we're going to run npm I Mongoose. So run that command. At your command prompt, your terminal inside of our Node Tunes application. Now, rather than store the connection string, I'm going to actually close all my files except app.js for now. So we're going to link to Mongoose in our app.js. And when the app starts, we're going to connect to our MongoDB that we have running on their Atlas Cloud service. But we'll store the credentials at least in a separate file. We won't put them in our application code. We'll make a separate file for this. So I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to make a new directory called config. And in here, in the config folder, we're going to make a new file to store application level variables. So that'll include our database connection. Later on, it might include some API keys, so we could do things like social sign-on. So in config, I'm going to make a new JavaScript file. Let's close up some of this other stuff for now. So in the config folder, I'm going to make a new JavaScript file called globals. I'll put in a note. So global config bars. So we're going to export this file so it's public. And we're going to create a JSON object here. I'm going to create a variable called DB. And I want to paste in my database connection string. So I still have it on my clipboard from before. You can always go and get it in MongoDB, in the MongoDB portal. If you click on connect, it gives you this option, connect your application. And it gives you the connection string here. So you can just copy this. And again, you'll replace the username and password. But I've already put the connection string in the chat. I'll just paste it down again. It's the same connection string we used to connect in Compass. So it's MongoDB plus SRV, and you'll just replace the username and password variables. And the database is NodeDB. So the same connection string we used to connect through Compass, we're going to use in our global configuration file. So add your config, your globals.js. We're adding this DB key with our database connection string, and we're exporting this whole object. So it's public. The next thing we're going to do, this will be the last thing that we do before we take a break, is we're then going to go to our app.js. We're going to link to the Mongoose package, and we're going to write a bit of code so that our web application connects to this database when it starts up. And it will print a message in the console that it's connected to MongoDB. If the database connection fails, we'll print out an error message. So every time we run our app, we'll know, are we connected to the database, yes or no? So we need a few lines in app.js for this. Just minimize. So down here, maybe after our routing, but before our 404 handling, we'll add our MongoDB connection with Mongoose. So we're going to require the Mongoose NPM package we installed. We're also going to link to the globals file. So we're going to reference this global configuration file we just made. So we can read the database connection string out of this file and include it when we call our connect method. So now we'll call Mongoose. It has a connect method. And the first parameter is the database connection string. So that's going to be our globals.db variable. There are a couple of options we also need to specify when we're attempting to connect to the database. One is we have to use this URL parser. We want to use the new one. This is just some under the hood plumbing. We won't get too deep into it. And we also need to use their unified topology. So a couple of options we need to specify in order for this to connect properly to the MongoDB cloud service. We can then evaluate with .then, did our connection work or not? If we get any sort of response, we'll log out connected to MongoDB. If we don't get a response, we'll error handle. So in this case, we'll log out an error message. So every time our application runs, it's going to try to connect to MongoDB using our connection string, these options. And if we have a response, we'll print out that we're connected. If we don't get a response, we'll catch any errors and we'll print this message instead. So I'm going to try this out. I'll save my changes, go back to my terminal, and I'll use nodemon. And my terminal says I am connected to MongoDB. So that's good. And now if I go to localhost 3000, my app is running. So again, we've created a global variable with our connection string. We've installed and referenced Mongoose. We're referencing our global file, and we attempt to connect when our app starts. I will put this stuff up on GitHub. I'm just going to take out my credentials. So now it's going to fail. It tells me could not connect as soon as I put in the wrong credentials. It says could not connect. I'm going to stop my app. I'm going to add my changes. So lesson 5, part 1. Add MongoDB connection. Okay, so I've put all the changes up. Chris, not right now, because right now, if you ignore it and then try to deploy it, you don't have the database connection string. There is a spot in here, I think, to add the connection variables, but for now I would include it. Just for simplicity. Your repository should be private anyway. Mine is not private. Mine's public. Right, so there are configuration variables here. So we have a chance we can look more into this. Okay, it's 12:54, so I've published what we've done so far up to GitHub. Now that the app can talk to MongoDB, we should be able to create a model and then write some code to query MongoDB and display data in our Node application. So that's what we're going to do when we come back.